Herald and News.
Herald and News, your news now.
The Herald and News.
Empowering the community.
Basin Views.
Herald and News, your news now. Klamath Falls, Oregon.
The Herald and News.
Podcast. Empowering the community and serving the Klamath Basin. This is the Herald and News Basin Views podcast. Greetings and welcome to Basin Views, a Herald and News podcast featuring interviews with local experts discussing issues important to the Klamath Basin. I'm Kurt Lidke with the Herald and News. This week we are joined by Jesse Widener of Klamath Film, here to discuss one of my favorite topics, movies, upcoming events such as the annual Klamath Independent Film Festival, and a special screening with a very special guest coming soon. Jesse, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule to join us.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, we will get into everything that Klamath Film entails in just a little bit, but I always like to start these things off with a little bit of background on our guests themselves. Can you educate us a little bit more about who Jesse Widener is?
Sure. So I've actually got a fairly wide arts background. I used to work as a draftsman and architect in California for about 7 years before I moved up here. I've studied music composition. I do some drawing, some writing, and I practiced photography for several years before I started getting into the film thing. So the film thing actually really comes from being this sort of great medium. It's an amalgamation of all these other disciplines that you can do, where you kind of throw all these different disparate interests into one thing.
So what was the first video project that you worked on?
The first project was probably actually the first project I did with Klamath Film, and it was on one of those old, I don't want to say old, it's like 90s, handheld, actually probably not even 90s, early 2000s, the DV cam with the digital videotape. And one of the first things I learned was that the screen on it is not as, it shows brighter than what the actual film was. So I was exposing to the screen, and when I actually took the footage home to work on it, was so dark, I had to crank everything, and it still looked nasty and black, and it was horrible.
I'm from Hollywood as well. Well, I grew up in Eugene, but I spent a long time in Hollywood, and those DV cameras, they're fascinating because when I was working on a lot of projects, some of those cameras were $50,000, $100,000. Right. Now that everything's gone digital, they're selling those things on eBay for $100, and people can't get rid of them.
Yeah. Ours was more of a consumer grade one though that we were using. It was like something you'd pick up at Fred Meyer or whatnot, and it just wasn't that hot. And me not knowing what I was doing with it was even worse. So.
Well, one thing that I have found fascinating being involved in film is the number of people like yourselves that got involved in it simply by doing, didn't have formal background. There are film schools that people can go to, but lots of times people just get involved in it for the sake of having an idea, grabbing a camera and giving it a try and kind of learning as you go. Right.
And that's a funny thing because I think, obviously the film industry is still young. We're talking maybe 100 years old, 120 years old, just, it's not like painting or something like that. And it's been a master apprentice industry for a long, long time. You'd start working on a film as a gopher basically and work your way up, and then at some point you did start getting into the film school stuff where that sort of seemed to be the advised path. Go to film school, go to USC, go to Southern California, whatever the case may be. And then in the last probably 20 years, with the advancements in the technology, and with the internet and having all of these YouTube videos and there's several channels that teach you how to do all these filmmaking techniques or whatnot. I think it's really democratized and commoditized that industry where you can just from your house get a $500 camera, and it's amazing compared to anything from 10, 20 years ago, and then sit on YouTube and figure out how to do stuff.
The technology is advanced, but what's really fascinating to me as just a fan of film in general, I love going back to the old silent film era, the old black and whites, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, stuff like that. And you look at the things that they were doing, they were inventing how films are made then. And while the technology may have changed, the method for creating film really hasn't over the course of a century.
Right. Yeah, the structure is generally the same. Actually, I have a slight complaint about the structure of film. When film first started out, and you're talking late 1800s, early 1900s, and nobody really knew what to do with it, there was this massive creativity of, what wild things can I do? What weird effects can I do? How can I freak people out that have never seen something on screen like this? And somewhere in the teens, the 19-teens, it sort of took on the purpose of film is to tell a story. And I think it's really been pigeonholed in that for 100 years. It's like saying the purpose of painting, before there was photography, the purpose of painting was to be as realistic as possible, and the medium geared towards that realism, until in the 1800s the camera came out, and then they realized somebody could just snap a picture, so what was the point of painting now? And that's when you saw painting expand into impressionism and surrealism and Dadaism and cubism and Jackson Pollock drip technique and all this kind of wild stuff.